Focuses on job creation. Businesses across New York are getting a bill from the state labor department that seems to contradict and not complement the governor's mission. Over the past several years, the state has received several $billion in unemployment insurance loans from the federal government. And now Washington is asking the state to pay its interest on those loans. And New York is passing that cost on to its business owners to the tune of $21 per employee. My next guest wants the state to pay the bill itself using the $800 million in extra revenue that it took in during the first quarter. He is Assembly Minority Leader Brian Kolb. He is joining us from Rochester. Assemblyman, thanks for your time.
Liz, always a pleasure. Good to see you, or sort of see you.
Right. Well, more or less, but you look good. So tell me exactly, it's actually $21.25 per employee to cover a $95 million interest payment, and you think that's unfair?
Well, it certainly is unfair because, quite frankly, Congress hasn't yet decided whether they're going to make this unemployment insurance loan tax-free again. But needless to say, Congress is having a few other problems on its own right now.
You think?
And I think that, yes, for sure. Actually, it's great. Washington makes New York State look terrific.
Yeah, amazing.
But certainly, I think really the fundamental issue is if we're really open for business and it's about jobs and everybody says they're about jobs, then why are we going to try to hit a surcharge to businesses across the state to the tune of $95 million when we have in excess of $800 million in tax receipts already this year that could more than pay that bill? And I think it clearly sends the wrong message, and this is exactly the types of things that drive small business people, large business people, mid-sized businesses crazy, that New York State, every chance it gets, tries to nickel-dime them when they can. Okay,
well, here's the problem, though. Are you really blaming New York State? Because it's 450,000 businesses statewide are going to owe this money by mid-August, and I get it. The bill is coming from the state labor department, but the problem is that Washington is not, unlike in other years, waiving this fee, right? They're not waiving that interest charge. And the problem is Washington. Why are you blaming the Cuomo administration?
Well, it's actually two parts. First of all, Congress is not doing its job, so that's bad enough. But why compound it with New York State that has a discretionary decision with the bureaucrats from the Department of Labor who have always been anti-business? I think that they long for opportunities to nickel-dime and tax businesses, whether they're small, mid-size, or large, because they can. And I think this is a significant disappointment with Governor Cuomo's administration if he allows the Department of Labor to go ahead and continue to send invoices and collect money from the very businesses that are trying to survive every single day.
Well, and the very businesses that are supposedly going to create those jobs that the governor says that he wants to have created as he refocuses for part 2 of his first year on economic development, right? I mean, that's what this whole week is all about.
That's correct, and even as they're trumpeting around right now about the economic development plan that's supposed to be collectively $1 billion, so how about we even take $95 million of the $1 billion that you're talking about economic development and don't tax business? And it's because they can and they do, and I think that's why I think it's so outrageous that we're trying to say we're open for business, but the first chance we get, we levy a surcharge against every single business in New York State. Okay, so what you're suggesting, I mean, this $1 billion, take the $95 million from the $1 billion that the governor wants businesses to compete for in economic development grants. That's actually a new suggestion. What you originally suggested was we had higher than expected tax revenue, according to the state comptroller, $800 million. And you're saying, okay, let's take that money and use it to pay off, some of it, to pay off this particular bill. The problem is that the comptroller says that the state's fiscal health remains tenuous. So is it really a good idea to be shoveling that money out the door? Well, first of all, you know, I think this is all about bureaucratic nonsense and spin. It's $134 billion. It's supposed to be balanced. We have excess tax receipts of $800 million so far this year. We're not even through the full fiscal year. And so, you know, I think, quite frankly, it's disingenuous for them to say we don't have the money to be able to pay for it, we can't get through one day to the next. Really? Then why are you saying we have $1 billion to spend on economic development? Why are you saying it at $800 million in extra tax receipts so far in 2011? And this is, again, this is a money grab. This is the typical bureaucratic nonsense that people are tired about. They're saying if you're really open for business, if you're really looking out for business, if you're really trying to encourage them to be happy about New York State, then why are you nickel-diming them? Every single business in this state that has an employee is getting a bill from the Department of Labor, who, quite frankly, I think treats business negatively and not as a customer as they should.
Well, you are a businessman, right? So you pretty much know what you're talking about there?
I've owned my own business in this state. We've employed people. I've worked for large and small companies. And Liz, you know, all you have to do is get around the state, which I do now in every part of the state, and every single business says, see, here's one more example where New York State's harassing me, trying to get into my pocket, rather than trying to find other ways to pay these bills, which there is money available. But I think the whole concept here is if you go out and talk to the business owners in this state, what they're trying to tell you, this is exactly the type of a small example where New York State says, you know, we're going to tax you, we're going to surcharge you, we're going to harass you, and every single bureaucracy we have in this state needs to be brought up to the real world that we're in.
Okay, so I understand obviously where you're coming from here, but generally speaking, you were pretty pleased with the Cuomo administration, or the governor at any rate, his approach, particularly during the session when he had the legislature pass the property tax cap and also had the legislature pass an on-time budget that did not rely on new taxes to close the budget deficit. So generally speaking, on the whole, do you believe that the Cuomo administration is pro-business?
I think that the jury's still out, to be honest with you, because here's the first opportunity that they have to arbitrarily, on its own administrative policy, to either put out a surcharge or not put out a surcharge, and they went out and put a surcharge. And so I'm not saying that they're anti-business, but here's one example of if you're really saying we're open for business, but the first thing we can do administratively is we're going to hit you with a surcharge. And I just think it's the wrong message. We don't have to do it. And I think that's why I'm speaking out about it, is that you got to walk the walk, and if you're really serious about opening this state up for business, the last thing you should be doing is hitting them with any kind of surcharge whatsoever.
Okay, I just want to ask you also regarding Washington and the debt ceiling. I mean, I know it's making Albany look good these days, but have you heard at all about any preparation that the state government is taking, because it might be actually having to deal with the fallout of a default? Have you talked to anybody at all about that?
No, well, there has not been any communication from the state comptroller's office or the governor's office or anybody else for that matter, whether there's any ripple effect from Washington on this. I think most people are hoping that grown-ups will show up and get a deal in place to restore confidence to the global economy and also to the citizens of the United States. This is exactly what turns people off about elected officials, all of the finger pointing instead of actually sitting down and getting a compromise dealt with. And quite frankly, it's frustrating. If we get a downgrade in our credit ratings, that means higher interest rates. That means higher interest rates for consumers and businesses. I will tell you, Liz, it's absolutely a disaster that's going on in Washington. Even if they get a deal on the debt ceiling, it just reinforces why people have a lack of confidence in their elected officials, regardless where they're, shall we say, governing.
Well, and in Albany, we're expecting to see the legislature come back at some point, because because now we have a tentative contract deal between the Cuomo administration and the union. Now, the legislature approved the CSEA contract before it departed for the summer at the end of June. Do you hear anything from the leaders about coming back, from the majority leaders about coming back to the Capitol?
Nothing firm as of right now. Quite frankly, it's my understanding that we could wait and come back in January and do the contract, so the contracts are retroactive to the date that the contracts were negotiated. But you never know. There could be a variety of other things that could be taken up before then that should, that's really not on the drawing board right now, or at least being talked about publicly. But I would not anticipate us to go back anytime before the primaries or the primary elections that are in September. But after that, anything's possible.
Do you agree with that? I mean, what about the idea that it might actually be better to just get back and get it done? Of course, as soon as you come back, all sorts of things could possibly happen.
Yeah, somebody might say, well, why don't we do a nonpartisan redistricting bill?
Yeah.
And who wants to do that, right? Or how about this? How about mandate relief? Wouldn't that be crazy further than what we did this year? So I think that's always a concern, is that there will be additional pressure to do other legislation that maybe people don't want to take up until after January. So that's always, shall we say, maybe the things that are talked about behind closed doors.
But there has been actually a call from good government advocates that the governor bring you guys back, call a session, a special session, to have the legislature address some of these things that are hanging out there, including redistricting reform. You and I have spoken about it in the past. I believe that you're in favor, and so far we haven't heard anything.
Well, of course, but actually, the Speaker of the Assembly, the President Pro Tem of the Senate can bring us back on their own. We don't need the governor to do that. But certainly, if there's agreed upon legislation between the governor and the two majorities, that would be a reason to come back on a variety of topics. Who knows whether that's going to happen, but at least historically, at least in our House, there's never been a sense of urgency about having fair and competitive elections. So I'm not so sure that they're really all wild and crazy about doing a nonpartisan redistricting. So we're going to continue to go through the hearing process that we're doing now, amongst a variety of other things that we could be dealing with. The governor had a Tier 6 pension reform that didn't get taken up, Medicaid reform. There's all sorts of things that we could do if they decide that to continue the legislative work in 2011. Well,
we know that you're available, and I appreciate that you made yourself available to us. It's good to see you. We haven't seen you in a while. Thank you very much for coming by. Minority Leader Brian Kolb, it's good to see you.
Great to be here, Liz. Thanks for having me on.